Welcome back to the channel. Now, by popular request, y'all love that last video so much about the Braxtons. I had to come back and bring it one more time because sometimes you got to pop up and show people that you that therapist. Now, I really want to talk about enmeshment in families. Now, so many families think that we're just super close. That's just the way it is. But what is the difference between being super close and having enmeshment? Now, what we see in the Braxtons to me is a lot of enmeshment, a lot of dysfunctional closeness of a family so much that nobody from the outside can penetrate them. Okay. And what is an enmeshed family? Well, you're about to find out right about now, but make sure you hit that like, that subscribe, and make sure you support the channel. We're growing here. And because of you guys, it's just sky's the limit. Now, thinking about enmeshed families, what does that term actually mean? Have you ever heard of enmeshed families? Enmeshment in families. Now, it is a term used when talking about the dysfunctionality of different types of families. Now, your girl, in enmeshed families, they're considered dysfunctional and can be characterized by lack of boundaries, okay, fear of abandonment, lack of confidence. Ooh, you see a lot of that when you think about the Braxtons, the boundaries, the lack of confidence, the fear of abandonment, and how trauma has so much impacted them in the way that they show up in their personal relationships with themselves as sisters and the relationships that they have with men. And I've discussed in past videos, it starts at the top. Okay, it started with Miss Braxton. But how did her dysfunctionality really filter in the relations that these women have with themselves and they have with other men? We have seen over and over again how none of these women have had healthy relationships with men. Okay, and that's because of the enmeshment in these families. Like, you want to be close to your family, you want to have a relationship with them, you want to be able to, like, you can count on them. But what happens when that closeness turns to enmeshment? Okay, and how the trauma of all of that just consumes how you show up. And the men that you see some of these women with, you've seen Tony be married, you've seen Tamar go through how many relationships. I recently did not know that she had been married a couple times. Okay, and all of her relationships seem to crumble right in front of the public eye. And we saw a little bit of Tawanda with Andre, a little bit. Once again, I felt like it was editing and we didn't see a lot of that dynamic, but we saw enough. Okay, we seen Trina, how Trina treated Gabe. Okay, and now she's with Vaughn, who to me is emotionally detached. Just like at times, she is emotionally detached and compartmentalize a lot of feelings. Okay. The only real one that we see in a partial healthy relationship was Trina. And I think that impacted them to the point where, because she, in some people's eyes, chose her marriage, chose her husband over the dysfunctionality and dynamics of the relationships of her sisters. At times, it made me think that she was othered. It made me feel like she was a black sheep of the family. And her and Tamar go back and forth about, being the black sheep, being outcasted by the sisters. But let's get into more of enmeshment in families. Now, how many of you guys feel like you are close with your family? Okay, let me know in the comments. And has that closeness ever created dysfunction in your relationships? How do your partners that you bring into that household reflect, get into, assimilate? Can they show up as themselves, or does your partner have to show up the way your family needs them to be? Because oftentimes the foundation of that relationship with this over here, your family, because families be in the business. They always got something to say about somebody you bring home. And that's why some of y'all probably don't even bring nobody home, because your family got something to say about it. But when it comes to enmeshment, okay, let's talk about some of the signs so you guys can recognize, are you the signs of, are you living with, are you demonstrating someone who is living in a family that has a lot of enmeshment? Number one, okay, one of those things is lack of boundaries. Does your family struggle with boundaries? Okay, we've seen over and over again how Tawanda and the mama don't have boundaries. Tamar and Miss E don't have boundaries, because in some ways, to me, Miss E and Tamar have a friendship. Not maybe so much mother and daughter at times, a friendship. And I see a lot of community of color. Now, let me tell y'all one thing, because some of y'all be in my comments saying, well, this happens in other races, ethnicities. I'm a black woman. Okay. I can't talk about no white perspective. I can only talk about my own. And if you can relate to those things, great. But I can only talk about what it's like to be a black woman, seeing some of these things in my clients and myself and my own different family dynamics. So yes, it could happen in a lot of other families, but I can only talk from a black perspective. Now, do y'all expect me to come over here and talk from a Latino perspective, a white perspective? I can only talk from my own. So let me just put that disclaimer out there. Now, going back to lack of boundaries, okay, we see over and over again how this family lacks boundaries. They cannot have a sense of self, be their own person because the boundaries are so blurred. They have to be who Miss E needs them to be, who the other sisters need them to be, who WeTV needs them to be. So there's a loss in sense of who are you really, okay? And that goes into having relationships with yourself outside of the family. Okay, another sign of enmeshment. What is your relationship with yourself outside of family? Do you have a sense of self outside of who you are supposed to be? Once again, that mascot, that golden child, the lost one, okay? Were you parentified so much that you don't know how to have an identity outside of being that adult child? Okay, the pressures that were placed on you, having a lack of sense of self because your whole identity is tied into your family, what they needed from you, what they want from you. So think about that. Also, we see in the same family, codependent relationships, getting your self-worth from the people you bring in, one another. I think at times Tamar demonstrates to me that she has a lot of codependent relationships. A lot of her sense of self comes from these relationships. And notice how a lot of the men are very similar. She's with that African dude, okay? She was with JR, okay? She's been with different relationships that harbor the same thing. And as much as I love Tamar, I see her more than just what she shows up as. The therapist in me sees a lot of trauma behind that. She does have to take some responsibility of how she ended up here. And I'm going to say that too. I'm not just going to be up here just siding. I don't take sides, okay? But she shows to me a lot of codependence. Who is she outside of her relationships? Because it seems like so much of what we see online, social media, in these shows are her relationships with other men, and how a lot of her sense of self and her self-worth come from these relationships, and that is codependence. That is what you see in a lot of enmeshment in families is codependence on relationships. And I want you guys to think about, do you know the difference between a sense of self and a sense of confidence? Because I think a lot of people do not know the difference in those things that I try and teach people. There is a difference between having confidence and your self-worth. And you can be confident on the outside, but inside, what does your self-worth show? What is really showing up? So that is something you also have to think about when thinking about these things and think about enmeshed relationships. Okay, now y'all keeping notes? Are y'all related to some of this stuff at all in general? Okay, some other things. Fear of abandonment. Now, who in this family do you identify with, or can you say that you see fear of abandonment from? Okay, now I think some of that we see from Trina. Trina is a follower. She's the lost one. I think a lot of times she functions out of fear of abandonment, following behind Tawanda, trying to follow behind her mom because there's not a good sense of self. Trying to figure out, who am I? Lack of identity, lack of confidence. So once again, that enmeshment in that family is showing up. And you see her relationship with Vaughn. Vaughn is an outsider from the outside family. All the men who come involved with these women never really to me get accepted, never to me really function as a healthy dynamic. They to me are just additives, okay? And I think with Trina and Vaughn, I think he's just another additive, okay? That doesn't function well with the family. He's very cold. The way he shows up at time, I'm like, girl, is he the one? Okay, or is he someone right now that fulfills that need inside you, that void? Ask yourself, do your relationships fill voids inside you, or do they make you fill up? Do they fill up your cup, your tank, your love tank? Because sometimes in enmeshment in families, it's more of, I need you to fill up something inside of me that I'm not getting from my family, maybe I didn't get from my mother. So we're seeing a lot of signs of enmeshment in this family. Okay, we talk about boundaries, we talk about sense of self, we talked about fear of abandonment. I think all these women are the reproduction, obviously, of their mother's trauma. Okay, and a lot of you guys have to think about when your parents do not heal from their own stuff, all that stuff is being poured into you. And your mother, your father, whoever it is that you thought you have a dysfunctional relationship with, and families with enmeshment are like this. The mother and the father need you to be like this because they need to have control. And they get a lot of their sense of self from you. And notice how when you become more independent, you become more of an adult, notice how they try and pull you back. Okay? Are you ever seen as an adult? Are you constantly seen as a child? Because sometimes your parents' self-worth comes from who you are. Okay? I don't know how to be nothing other than no mama. I don't even know how to do nothing other than being a father. Their sense of identity sometimes are tied so close to that relationship that you becoming independent, what am I supposed to do with myself? What does that mean for me? It means you can have your own life. Be more than a mom. But so many people, I think, are trying to reparent themselves through their own children that there's a lack of identity. And I see so many moms, so many people just exhausted because they're pouring so much into their children, which is not necessarily a bad thing. But when it gets to the point that you don't have a sense of identity and you're getting all of your self-worth from that child, not only does that put pressure on the child, it exhausts you. And we're trying so hard to break generational curses, generational trauma by giving to our children, pouring, that there is nothing left for ourselves. And you have to work on who you are outside of your trauma, who you are outside of your parenting. You can have a life outside of being a mom. You can have a life outside of being a dad because your child is sometimes picking up on your own anxiety. They're picking up on your own anxiousness, your own trauma that you're trying to use to reparent them so much so that, mama, I'm good. But because you are trying to pour so much into that child that you didn't get from your own family, that you're exhausted. And this might be, not a popular thing, but you don't have to pour all your time into your kids. It is important to have a life on your own. It's important to establish who you are as a person because you don't want to become Miss E, right? You don't want to be 65. You don't want to be 70. You don't want your kids to, you don't want to be an empty nester still trying to figure out who you are because you pour so much into your children, so much into trying to reparent, trying to heal yourself through your kids. And I think at times we have seen how the daughters try and be more independent, try and have their own lives. But when they do, they get ousted. They get laid with the black sheep because, no, stay over here. Stay enmeshed with us. Stay this close, okay? We're in trauma, so you're not going to be that little crap to get out the bucket. Stay down here with us. Do what we doing. Function like we do. And we see how that happened to Traci. I feel like at times that's happened to Tamar. The more they try and get out of the system just pulls them back in. Because I think these women don't know how to function outside of this dynamic. And I think a lot of you guys maybe need to take a step back and look at your own relationships with yourselves, with your family members, and see that, are you perpetuating the same thing that we're seeing on the Braxtons? Because in a lot of ways, it is mirroring and highlighting family dynamics. Some people in a good way, some people poorly. Because some of y'all in my comments say that this is not my life. Other people say that it is. Okay? So there are times where people really are connecting with what they're seeing, which is a good thing and necessarily a bad thing. Okay? But I think that when it comes to enmeshment in families, I want you guys to think about, how is my family serving me? Is there reciprocity? Or am I so enmeshed that I can't have an identity and see who I am outside of the family dynamics? Once again, some of those things we talked about are the lack of boundaries, lack of sense of self. You're not allowed to be independent. Oh no, stay over here. And just how your parental trauma from your parents, that generational stuff that is coming down that bloodline, is affecting you. Now, these are just some of my quick thoughts. I want to know how you guys feel. Do you see the enmeshment in your own family dynamics? How do your partners show up? When you bring that person home, do they feel comfortable? Do they have to prove themselves to your family? Let me know, because it just can't be me seeing it. But of course, we can get into it and we can go deep. But I want to know what you guys think, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye.